Lily Jameson stepped into the towering glass building with a mixture of excitement and nervousness swirling in her chest like a restless storm. Her worn leather bag swung gently by her side, and her modest, slightly faded blouse made her feel painfully aware of the sharp contrast between her humble appearance and the polished, high-powered world around her. The air was crisp with the scent of fresh coffee and expensive cologne, a world she had only ever seen from afar in glossy magazines and online profiles. Her heart pounded as she walked through the sleek marble lobby, each step echoing in the vast space, reminding her how small she felt in this enormous, unfamiliar place. People in tailored suits passed by with brisk, indifferent glances, eyes sliding over her like she was invisible, or worse, an unwelcome distraction. She was the only one whose shoes weren't the latest fashion, whose hands bore the faint calluses of years working odd jobs to pay her tuition. Yet here she was, determined to prove she belonged. Then came Martin Hale, the head of human resources, a man whose icy stare could freeze the blood. He approached with a faint, contemptuous smirk playing on his lips, his perfectly pressed suit a stark symbol of the hierarchy that kept people like Lily in their place. Without so much as a greeting, he glanced her up and down and said with biting clarity, "We don't have time for country girls fumbling around in here. Stick to the copier and the coffee, and maybe you won't embarrass yourself." The words landed on Lily like a slap, sharp and humiliating. Her cheeks burned crimson, and for a moment she wanted to shrink away and disappear. The hum of whispered laughter rippled through the nearby cubicles. Eyes that had briefly flicked to her now lingered, filled with judgment and scorn. She could feel their silent verdict, unworthy, naive, out of place. But beneath the burning shame, something steadied inside her, a quiet resolve that refused to be crushed by condescension. She swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing a steady breath as she replied, voice soft but steady, "I'm here to work hard and learn." The room seemed to freeze, the air thick with disbelief and a touch of amusement at her earnestness. Martin's smile twisted into something colder, more dismissive, and he waved a hand toward the back office. "Fine. You'll start by handling the printer and the coffee runs. Maybe then you'll learn what it means to be part of this team." Lily nodded, though every fiber of her body ached with the sting of rejection. She turned and walked away, clutching the small packet of company materials they had handed her like a lifeline. As she made her way past rows of sleek desks and buzzing computers, the faces she passed were masks of polite disinterest or thinly veiled disdain. Whispers trailed behind her, echoes of the label they had already pinned on her. The country girl, the outsider, the joke. Yet, beneath that heavy cloak of isolation, Lily's eyes held a flicker of fire. She wasn't here to be laughed at or dismissed. She was here to carve out her place, no matter how long it took, no matter how many times she had to endure the sneers and cold shoulders. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a slow unraveling of Lily's spirit, as the invisible walls of isolation closed tighter around her. The office, once a place of hope and new beginnings, transformed into a labyrinth of cold stares and whispered jokes she could almost hear dripping with malice. Every glance cast her way was a dagger coated in disdain, every sideways smile a silent sneer she couldn't escape. At her desk, tucked in the farthest corner like a forgotten relic, Lily felt the weight of the room press down relentlessly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to focus on the endless spreadsheets and emails that seemed like an alien language. The hum of printers and clatter of keyboards only reminded her how out of place she was. She wasn't just different in appearance. Her accent, her quiet ways, her humble background, they all marked her as an outsider, a target for scorn. Each morning, the ritual of walking past her colleagues felt like wading through a sea of icy water. Conversations would hush the instant she approached, laughter abruptly cut off as if she carried a cloud of bad luck. Her attempts to join in were met with half-hearted nods or outright silence. When she spoke, her words were often met with raised eyebrows or derisive chuckles. One day, as she tried to share an idea during a team meeting, the room was so thick with skepticism that her voice seemed to dissolve before it could even find ears willing to listen. In the break room, she became a ghost. No one invited her to sit with them. Instead, she ate alone at a small table near the window, tracing patterns on her lunch wrapper, feeling the sting of loneliness settle deep into her bones. She overheard snippets of cruel jokes aimed at the little country girl, their laughter ringing in her ears like a merciless storm. Even the youngest interns seemed to join the silent ritual of exclusion, their smiles tinged with mockery. There were moments when the hurt was so sharp it took her breath away, tears threatening to spill but always held back by a stubborn pride that refused to give them permission. The nights after work were long and quiet, filled with replaying every slight, every mocking glance, until exhaustion pulled her under. She wondered if maybe she was just a fool chasing a dream that wasn't meant for someone like her, someone who had to fight twice as hard for even a sliver of respect. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of isolation, a slow-burning ember of defiance glowed brighter. Lily clenched her fists beneath the table, reminding herself that this was not the end. If they thought they could break her spirit with sneers and cold shoulders, they were mistaken. Each day of being ignored, each whispered insult, was a challenge she would meet head-on. She would learn their language, master their ways, and someday, the laughter wouldn't be at her expense. It would be because she had risen far beyond the confines they had set for her. For now, though, she endured the sting of being unseen, unheard, mocked, a silent soldier in a battle that was just beginning. The moment came like a sudden storm, unexpected and ruthless, tearing through the fragile calm Lily had built around herself. It was the day of the big project presentation, a chance she had waited for, hoped for, prayed for, the moment where her hard work could finally pierce through the walls of doubt that had imprisoned her. But instead of the breakthrough she dreamed of, it became the battlefield where everything she feared collided with brutal reality. From the moment she stepped into the conference room, her heart pounded with a fierce mix of hope and dread. The faces around the long table were masks of polite disinterest, some barely concealing smirks that threatened to shatter her fragile confidence. Her notes trembled slightly in her hands as she set up her slides, her breath hitching with the weight of all the silent judgments pressing down on her. As she began to speak, her voice wavered just for a moment, enough for the sharp eyes of her detractors to seize their opportunity. The questions came fast, not the curious, constructive ones she had prepared for, but the cold, cutting kind that aimed to dismantle rather than understand. "Are you sure these figures are accurate?" one sneered. "This approach seems naive," said another, with a tone dripping in condescension. The room was thick with an invisible hostility that felt like icy hands gripping her throat. Her cheeks burned with a mixture of embarrassment and rising anger, but she forced herself to stay steady. She answered carefully, explaining her data, her rationale, but the words felt hollow, deflected by smirks and exchanged glances that screamed disbelief. At one point, a cruel laugh escaped from the corner, a stinging reminder of how little they believed she belonged there. It was as if every ounce of her effort was being torn apart in slow motion, the foundation of her dreams crumbling beneath the weight of their derision. Lily's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill over, but she swallowed them back fiercely. This was her fight, her mountain to climb. She dug deeper, summoning a resolve she didn't know she had. Each response became sharper, more confident. She exposed the flaws in their assumptions with quiet authority, laid bare the strengths of her proposal with clarity that could not be denied. The room fell silent, not with acceptance, but with grudging respect, a shift subtle yet profound. Still, the aftermath was a bitter taste lingering in her mouth. The whispers didn't stop, the sideways glances continued, and the loneliness felt heavier than ever. Yet beneath the exhaustion and pain, a fierce fire was kindled. This trial had carved a new edge in her spirit, a resilience forged in the crucible of doubt and scorn. Lily knew the road ahead would be longer and harder than she ever imagined, but the summit of that challenge no longer seemed impossible. The storm had tested her, nearly broken her, but it had also revealed a strength that would not be silenced or ignored. The air in the room was thick with skepticism as Lily returned to prepare for her next presentation. Her heart still bruised from the last encounter, but her spirit far from defeated. She had spent countless nights reworking every detail, digging deeper into her research, determined to turn the tide. This was no longer just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to herself that she belonged, that her voice mattered, that her vision could not be ignored. When the moment came, The lights dimmed and the screen lit up with slides that shimmered with clarity and insight. Lily's voice, this time, carried a calm, steady power that commanded attention without a hint of hesitation. She began with a story, a vivid human story that breathed life into the cold numbers and charts. Her words painted images so real, the room seemed to pause, caught in the gravity of what she was unveiling. The skepticism in their eyes flickered, replaced by curiosity, then by a growing sense of awe. As she moved through the data, each slide was a revelation, exposing truths that had been overlooked, possibilities that had been dismissed. She connected the dots with a seamless logic that even the harshest critics could not ignore. Her passion was contagious, lighting a spark in the faces that had been so quick to dismiss her before. She wasn't just delivering facts, she was igniting a vision, a call to action that resonated deep within the core of the room. The climax of her presentation was a live demonstration, a bold move that silenced the last whispers of doubt. The model she had built, the prototype that had been the subject of so much mockery, came alive with undeniable proof. The room erupted, not in derision, but in stunned applause, the kind that shakes the very foundation of old judgments and opens doors once slammed shut. Lily felt a wave of emotion crash over her. Relief, triumph, vindication, but beneath it all, something more profound. A quiet pride in herself for holding on, for fighting when everything seemed lost. She had not just survived the storm. She had harnessed it, transforming the jeers and sneers into the fuel for her greatest achievement. As she stepped down from the podium, eyes now filled with respect and even admiration followed her every move. The whispers had changed. They were no longer words of mockery but of recognition. She had flipped the narrative, shattered the walls of doubt, and in doing so, reshaped the future not just for herself but for anyone who had ever been written off too soon. The applause was still echoing faintly in Lily's ears when a silence swept over the room, heavier this time, filled with anticipation that had nothing to do with her presentation. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if a quiet storm was about to break. Lily knew this moment had come. What she had long guarded beneath layers of silence and scars was about to surface. The truth that had been buried under years of misunderstanding, judgment, and quiet suffering was ready to be unveiled. With steady hands and a voice now laced with vulnerability and strength intertwined, Lily began to peel back the layers of her carefully constructed facade. She spoke of her past, not as a story of shame or defeat, but as a testament to resilience. She shared fragments of a life that few knew, the battles fought in shadows, the sacrifices made far from the public eye, the weight of expectations crushed under the relentless pressure of invisibility. The room held its breath, captivated not just by the facts but by the raw humanity pouring from her words. She revealed her identity, not just as a newcomer or an underestimated figure, but as someone who had carried the burden of untold struggles and unseen victories. She was a former soldier, a guardian who had stood on the front lines, not only in battle but in the silent wars waged within her own soul. The whispers of doubt that once lingered in the air seemed to dissolve, replaced by a reverent silence. Faces softened, eyes glistened with newfound respect, some even shimmering with tears. Lily did not ask for pity or praise. She sought understanding, a bridge from isolation to connection. She spoke of the loneliness that had once threatened to consume her, the judgment that had tried to define her worth. Yet, through it all, she had never lost the fire that fueled her purpose. Her true identity was not just a revelation. It was a declaration that the scars she bore were marks of honor, that beneath the surface lay strength forged in the crucible of hardship. As the final words left her lips, the room erupted, not with the clamor of applause, but with a profound silence that spoke louder than words. In that silence, every soul present felt the weight of her journey, the depth of her courage, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer the person they thought they knew. She was whole, unshakable, and infinitely worthy. And in that moment, the walls of alienation crumbled, replaced by a fragile yet powerful thread of empathy that connected Lily to those around her. The revelation was more than personal. It was a shared awakening, a call to see beyond surface judgments and honor the stories hidden in every quiet heart. As the room settled into that sacred silence, thick with reflection, humility, and the echo of truths just spoken. Lily took a quiet step forward. Her eyes swept gently across the crowd, not in defiance or triumph, but with a gaze filled with compassion. The very people who had once turned their backs, whispered in corridors, or laughed at her silence, now sat frozen, disarmed and open. She could see it in their eyes. Something had shifted. But she knew this moment wasn't about vindication. It was about something larger than herself. It was about all the unseen, unheard, and misunderstood souls who carried their quiet strength through the world, praying only to be seen. Lily's voice, soft but clear, filled the space once more, not as a lecture, not even as a lesson, but as a deeply human offering. She spoke not just to their ears but to something deeper, the part of every person that had ever been afraid, ever judged too quickly, or felt too late to change. Her words were not adorned with clever phrases or intellectual armor. They were simple, honest, meant to stir conscience. She spoke of how easy it is to mock what we don't understand, how tempting it is to define someone by a moment, a silence, a scar. She reminded them, gently, painfully, that dignity doesn't always arrive wrapped in charisma or confidence. Sometimes it walks in quietly, in borrowed clothes, in the form of someone we overlooked. Sometimes, greatness sits behind the desk we ignore, or sweeps the floor we walk over. Tears had begun to fall, some silently, some unashamed. And Lily did not flinch. She let the truth settle. Then she offered her final words, not as a goodbye, but as a seed. She asked them to see the world with slower eyes, to pause before passing judgment, to look again when something seems unimportant, or someone seems invisible. She urged them to protect not just their ideas but each other. Because the real danger, she said, isn't ignorance. It's indifference. It's what we kill in others by refusing to see their worth. And lastly, she left them with this. The measure of your character is never found in your title or your performance. It is found in how you treat the silent, the weary, the ones you think have nothing to offer. Because one day, they may be the ones who carry you. The room stood still, not out of duty, but out of reverence. In that closing moment, Lily didn't look victorious, she looked free. And as she stepped down, it wasn't just she who had changed. A campus, a crowd, a culture, had begun to awaken.